Hi everyone, and welcome to another one of our World Book Day exclusives where we get to meet another published author, something that we really like to do during World Book Day. My name's Tom Pinkstone. I'm one of our Ormiston lead practitioners for English, and I'm very excited today to be able to introduce Phil Earle, a published author for us to speak to this afternoon, and we'll be asking him the usual kind of questions that we like to ask on World Book Day around his kind of inspiration for writing and what he thinks about World Book Day as well. So Phil, you're going to do most of the talking here because we want to hear from you today. So we just start off. A lot of our students often kind of ask about how authors get into writing, and loads of them love writing. So you're able just to give us a bit of an idea of how you got into writing, please?
Yeah, of course. Purely by accident, by mistake. I didn't hold any aspirations growing up to be a writer. I didn't think, to be honest, that I grew up with any aspirations to be a reader either. I struggled with it, if I'm honest. I went to school a long time ago, sort of 70s and 80s, and novels were hard. I found them very difficult, and as a result, pretty much didn't feel like I was a reader. But what I did read was comics growing up. In particular, one called Roy the Rovers, which was a weekly comic just about this fictional footballer called Roy Race. And but teaching was very different then. School was very different then. Reading kind of had to look like this. You know what I mean? It had to be a novel, and it had to be 300 pages long, preferably written 100 years ago. And when you opened it up, it had to look like this. And that scared me to death. And as a result, I didn't do it. So I read comics, but didn't think it was proper reading, and was quite happily chugging along like that until I got to the mid-20s. And I had to get a job, as we all do. And I got a job in a bookshop just to pay the bills. And the lady that run the children's section made me go and work with her, and said to me, right, you need to start reading these kids' books, because when young people come in the shop, I want you to recommend them. I want you to shove books into people's hands and say, this is amazing, give it a try. And she gave me a copy of Holes by Lewis Sacco to read, which a lot of schools do study, often sort of year 6, year 7. And it was literally, for me, it was like that light bulb moment. It was like, because all of a sudden here was a novel that I actually wanted to read, because it was short, it was 200 pages long, but it covered 200 years of history, and it was a drama and a comedy and a western and a crime book and a murder book, and it, it made me laugh and it made me gasp, and it had these lizards in it, and when they bite you, they inject you with this venom and you die an ugly death. It had everything. So for the next 2 years, I really just read, while I was working in the bookshop, I read everything for young people I could get my hands on. And it made me realise I wanted to try and write something. It was like, can I do that same thing that these other writers do? Can I entertain people? Can I come up with these stories? So that was the starting point. But it was very much the last thing on my mind as I grew up. I wanted to play for Hull City. I didn't want to be a writer.
Great, but yeah, nice to kind of give us a bit of an idea of how you kind of got into that process. And I suppose then you're saying that it comes from that love of reading then first, really, those books that kind of got you hooked in. You've gone on to write loads. Is it a fair question to ask which one of your own is your favourite that you've written? Is that a difficult question to answer?
Hang on, let me grab them. Just here, hang on. Freaks me out a little bit, because like when I pick this pile up and show people, like there's 20 books there, and some short, some long, and it weirds me out, because I never thought I'd write so much as a shopping list in my life, But what I realised as I got older, is that thing that reading doesn't just have to look like this. I'm what am I now? I'm 47, and these things, things like Batman, Daredevil, the Avengers are still a massive part of my life, and also things like this as well. I read Empire every single month, because cinema's another huge passion. So it's that discovering that thing that we all can write, we all can read, we just do it in different ways. Was huge. And so when people ask me what my favourite book is, I usually find it really hard, because it's like they all are, because I never thought I'd write anything. But it kind of changed really. This book, When the Sky Falls, came out June last year. And I think now I have to say this is my favourite. I think, I wrote it at quite a tricky time. I'd struggled to write for a couple of years, and this book got me back into writing. and it allowed me to deal with a lot of difficult stuff that I've been going through. And also, it was just a really great gift of a story. I don't think I've ever enjoyed telling a story as much as I did this one. So a very long-winded answer is, yeah, this one.
Can you give us a bit of an idea of what that one's about, Phil?
Yeah, happily. Kind of one of the things that like really excites me about writing is that moment when an idea first kind of drops into your head. Do you know what I mean? And what I love about writing is that those ideas can come from anything, you know, from a movie, from another book, from reading the paper, from just walking down the street and spotting something insignificant. And the idea for When the Sky Falls came from a really sort of nothingy conversation, really. I was on holiday about 8 years ago with a very dear friend who had grown up during the Second World War in Manchester. And his old man, his dad, wasn't allowed to fight because he had asthma. And as a result, his dad was part of the Home Guard. And every time the air raid siren rang in Manchester, his dad had one job, which was to grab a rifle and leg it to Bellevue Zoo in Manchester. And he had to sit there all night with this rifle trained through the bars of the lion's cage, because if the Nazis dropped a bomb that landed on the zoo and it blew out the wall of the lion's cage, it's his dad's job to shoot the lion before he went on the rampage. And when my friend told me this story, it was like it sounds a bit daft, but it was like being set on fire. You know, like, whoa, just like senses were on fire. It was just I knew there was a story in that. And the nicest thing about being a writer, I think, is that to be a writer, you only really have to ask yourself one question, which is what if? And for me, it was like, what if that rifle didn't end up in the arms of a responsible adult, but in the arms of like this really angry kid? And what if the animal inside the cage wasn't a lion anymore? What if it was the sort of animal that boy could have forged a relationship with? What if it was a grumpy, surly silverback gorilla called Adonis? So it's the story of a boy called Joseph Palmer, who's 12. And while 1.5 million other kids are being evacuated from the dangers of the city to the safety of the countryside, he's traveling the opposite direction into the city where bombs are falling, because his behavior is so bad that the only person that will take him in lives in the city. And that woman happens to be the manager of the zoo, the city's zoo. And most of the animals have been killed. When war was declared, right, in 1939, the government sent like a pamphlet to every household saying it's not going to be safe for your animals, so put them to sleep, have them killed. And as a result, in 1 month, 750,000 animals were put to sleep, which is pretty blooming scary. And so when he gets to the zoo, Joseph realizes there's not many animals left, but this gorilla, Adonis, is one of them. And they have a very rocky start to the relationship, but as the pages and the months pass, you find them getting closer and closer, and secrets get revealed. And in the end, the bombs are falling, and that rifle does end up in Joseph's hands, and he has to make a big decision, which is, could he possibly pull the trigger on the one thing in his life that he's really loved? So in a nutshell, that's kind of what it's about, really.
Well, you sold it to me there, Phil, and I think like everyone knows you need to be asking your school librarians now to get a copy. If it's not in the library, go and have a look, because that sounds absolutely fascinating. Sounds really, really interesting.
Thank you.
One question I always like to ask, because it's the thing that I always struggle with when I'm like how to write a short story or a novel. And we spoke to different authors who do it in very different ways. I remember speaking to one who was very much a case of, I do loads of mind maps and I kind of like picture the world. How can you just talk us through how you go about that process? Because I find it really overwhelming. I don't know how to go about it, really.
I think the nice thing about writing really is that there's no rules. Do you know what I mean? It's that beautiful thing of I think I can sum up the joy of writing in one word, and it's playtime. It's that sense of like, you know, when you're in junior school and the bell rings, and it's that best moment of your day, because you can run out into the yard and go on any imaginative journey that you want. And watching like years 3, 4 sort of play is the best thing, because they're pretending to be pirates and superheroes and football. Do you know what I mean? It's just pure playtime. And as an adult, it pretty much stinks as an existence, because playtime disappears because of jobs and stuff. But for me, when I sit and write, it is that thing of, I feel like I'm 10 and the bell's just gone. You know, when I sit and write, there's nowhere I can't go, and there's nothing I can't do. There's no world I can't create. There's no person I can't pretend to be. And so when I sit and write, I don't plan in advance. I have an idea that I'm excited about, and then I see where that takes me. And sometimes that can take you down a dark alley, and that's all right. And then you back up, you reverse out of the alley, and you go off in a different direction. It's about finding what works for you. If the only way that you can tell a good story is by planning it, then that's fine. Plan it. You know, work out A to B, what mind maps or flow charts or chapter by chapter plans. For me, I'm my first audience, if that makes sense. It's like I'm the first reader as well as the writer. I want to experience what it's like, and so I don't plan because it's exciting for me to find out for the first time as I write it.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, and that chance that's the joy of writing, isn't it? By the sounds of it, so that creative freedom just to play around with words and just see where it takes you.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think the other thing is it's that thing of saying to new writers, you can't get it wrong. Do you know? It's not like maths where you get an equation wrong and everything else, goes out of kilter. It's like the first thing that you write on the page doesn't have to be the thing that appears in the final story. That's why we edit. You know, any writer that tells you their first draft is what appears in the book is a liar, because you write and you rewrite and you rewrite and you listen to other people's advice and you assimilate it and then you write again. And so it's about forgiving yourself. Allow your first draft to be pretty terrible. It doesn't matter. You've not lost anything. You just go back and you strengthen it.
No, I think that's a really important point, isn't it? Because we often, we have that little fear of failure, don't we, that kind of crops in with English and writing, where we're like, oh, don't know if I want to try that hard on this in case it doesn't quite work. Whereas like just flipping that round and thinking, actually, yeah, I'm just gonna have a go at this and see how it pans out.
The only way failure exists as a writer is not doing it if it's something that you want to do. Do you know what I mean? That's the only way you can define failure. The act of creating something is success in itself, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So we've got a great understanding of the writing process there. You mentioned a couple of novels early on, like Holes and things like that, Phil, but are there any other books that continue to be like an influence on your writing, or that you just love reading that we could have a bit of an insight into?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, there are certain books that I will come back to time and again, because for me, they just sort of sum up what great writing is. So books like Robert Westall's The Machine Gunners, which it won the Carnegie Medal, in the 70s, so like 40 years ago now, set in World War II, about a group of children who find a crashed German bomber, and they're all into collecting memorabilia, and they've often collected like shells and nose cones off bombs and stuff. But this time they find the ultimate, because on board this bomber is still the machine gun. And so they take a hacksaw and they remove it, and they use it for their own means to try and protect and defend the Northeast where they live. And that's just a brilliant book because what I love about children's books in particular is it's kids that save the day. Get the adults out the way. The adults are the boring ones. It's the kids who do the fun stuff. It's like when you watch the film The Goonies, like from the 80s, it's like it's the kids that save the day. And so that's a brilliant, brilliant example of that. The other one I always come back to as well, because everyone talks about Roald Dahl, quite rightly. He's a brilliant storyteller, and they talk about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and, Fantastic Mr. Fox or the BFG because of the size of the imagination in those books. But for me, it's this one. It's Danny Champion of the World, because this book's really simple. It's the story really about a boy who's got a dad, and his dad's got a secret, and this kid thinks his dad's the greatest dad in the history of the world ever, and his dad's a poacher. And that, in essence, in a very boring way, is what the book is about. But for me, it's perfect. It's gentle, yeah, it's funny, and it's sad, but it's also pacey. It manages to be. This isn't a Marvel superhero book or film, where there's explosions on every page, but it gripped me from start to finish. And so it's about being patient as a writer. You can write patiently, but still excitingly, if you know what I mean. So yeah, Danny Champion of the World's another good one, I think.
There we go, folks. Another good recommendation for you. If you've not read it, go and find it. Get in your school libraries. And Phil, I think we should finish by just thinking about World Book Day itself. it's been around for ages now. Why do you think it's so important that we have something like World Book Day?
Well, it's important. I mean, it's like, there are so many demands on teachers' times within schools. There are so many bits of the curriculum that you guys have to cover off, and tick boxes and prepare students that are ready for exams. And that sometimes just actually the nice thing about escaping into a story can just be forgotten. Do you know what I mean? That notion of reading for pleasure. Because actually there is no other type of reading, really. If you're not enjoying reading, then what is the point of doing it? You just haven't found the right thing to read yet. And as I say, it doesn't have to be a novel. It could be a comic or a magazine, or you can read with your ears. You don't have to read with your eyes. You can download pretty much any book you've ever wanted to read and just listen to it instead. So it's just a reminder. Well, Book Day is a reminder of that, really. I think it's a reminder of reading for pleasure. Reading the stuff that makes you happy. If football is your thing, there are 1,000 books and 10,000 books, 1,000,000 books written on it. Do you know what I mean? Whatever your thing is in life, you can find something, a story about it. And so it just comes back to that reading for pleasure, reading for kicks, really.
Yeah, which is what it's all about. And I think that's a very nice way for us to finish there, Phil. So thank you very much for your time with us today. And we've found that really useful. Yeah, Phil, Earle, thank you.
Pleasure.